Alright, in this video we are going to answer the question, what is the most effective submission in high level mixed martial arts competition from the UFC? So we track over 25 years worth of data from the UFC right back to 1993 and UFC 1, that's over 4,500 fights. And on MMA 1-to-1 in the main statistics section here, you'll find a bunch of really interesting data, but we're going to scroll right through and get to the definitive list of which submissions are most effective. In other words, which ones have been used to finish the most fights. We look at the list here under the headline of what submission is the best. This is actually quite an easy question to answer. There's a clear winner here, the rear naked choke in on the number one spot, absolutely dominant submission, 350 submissions at about a 7.5% finishing rate. Compared to its next nearest rival in at number 2, the guillotine choke, around half of those finishes at 170, about 3.7% finishing rate. In at number 3, armbar, a little way behind the guillotine choke, around a 3% finishing rate. And then rounding out the top 5, the triangle choke and the arm triangle, with around 60 and 50 submissions each, just over a 1% finishing rate. So that 7.63% finishing rate is for all fights in the UFC ever. That's the rear naked choke has been used to finish a fight 7.6% of the time. If we scroll down to our next graph, we'll get to see that represented with a nice visual pie chart from here. So again, you can see that this blue slice right here is the rear naked choke, and again completely outweighs everything else. Dominant first position. The next nearest rival, guillotine choke. Now interestingly, if you look at just these two, the rear naked choke and the guillotine choke, they combine to over half of all submissions ever achieved in the UFC. That's around a 55% share between those two. So the rear naked choke itself finishes around 1 in 3 fights that end by submission, and more than half of the fights that end in submission can either be attributed to the rear naked choke or the guillotine choke. Armbar coming in again at 3rd spot. You can see how much smaller you start to get in terms of these slices once you start get down to the triangle chokes, arm triangle and standard triangle choke, and then far smaller once we get down to kimuras and heel hooks and Darce chokes here. Everything else outside of the top 10, for this graph at least, is represented by this slice, which is just other submissions. Finally, we're going to look at this next graph, which is effectively market share over time. So this is not year-on-year individual statistics, this is accumulative data over time. So if we have a look at the rear naked choke line here, you will see that in the early years it wasn't quite in the number 1 slot for a period of time. So up until around 2005 it was actually second to the armbar, but in the modern era from around 2005 onwards, when the fights and events exploded, it was eclipsed by the rear naked choke, and then it really ran away with it. So a clear number 1 spot now. So in first position again, rear naked choke till its current market share of around 37%. In second place, the guillotine choke with around 18%, and then falling away from it is the armbar here with, get it up, just around a 14.5% market share. So you'll see around 2014 that the guillotine finally eclipsed the armbar and stole that second slot from it. So that gives us a nice definitive answer to the question, what is the most effective submission in the UFC? For more interesting submission statistics, just visit our site, MMA1to1.com. There's a whole host of data in there, not just around submissions, but around many other parameters as well. So go check it out.